Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the first ever episode of Dig Deeper. Since this is the first episode, I want to kind of go ahead and give everybody a preface of what this is going to be about and what this whole episodic thing is going to entail. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to do a short Bible study derived straight from God's Word every single Sunday at 3 o'clock to 3:30. And it's going to be a great time, and these are all ones that I've written and things that God has placed on my heart in the last week that I'm going to bring to you guys over the air. And that's going to be the first 15 minutes of this whole radio show. And then the last 15 minutes of this 30-minute radio show is going to be kind of a sit-down interview with some pastors, maybe some worship leaders, people like that from around the area and all over the state, really, of Arkansas. And I'm so excited to get started with this, and it's going to be a great time, I know for sure. And yeah, so without further ado, let's go ahead and get started with what we've got here. So today we're going to go ahead and be in 1 Corinthians 13. It's a passage that I think everybody probably knows. You don't even have to be a Christian to really know this passage necessarily, because it's proclaimed at pretty much every single wedding we've ever been at. That's, of course, I'm kind of getting ahead of myself right here, the whole love is patient, love is kind stuff. But what I'm kind of wanting to do with this podcast is make it stuff that we can apply to our lives. We can apply to our jobs. We can apply to our churches. So we're going to look at how this applies to leadership in everyday roles, whether it be as a parent or as a boss or anything. Maybe even a group project leader. These are all things that you should consider whenever selecting somebody like this. So I think we're going to go ahead and get started here. So starting in verse 1, go ahead. If you want to, you can follow along. If not, you can, of course, just listen to my voice. But starting off in verse 1 and going all the way till the end of the chapter, it says, "If I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. If I give away all I have, and if I deliver my body to be burned, but have not love, I gain nothing. Love is patient, and love is kind. Love does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices within the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. As for prophecies, they will pass away. As for tongues, they will cease. As for knowledge, it will pass away. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part. But when the perfect comes, the partial will pass away. When I was a child, I spoke like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. But when I became a man, I gave up childish ways. For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part. Then I shall know fully, even as I have been fully known. So now faith, hope, and love abide, these three. But the greatest is love." So kind of going back to the main point of what I'm going to speak to you guys about today is about how this applies to leadership. And I think that is kind of shown off at the very beginning of this passage in the first couple of verses, where he talks about, "If I speak in the tongues of men and angels, but have not love, I am but a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal." And I think we kind of look at love as something that we save for a significant other or in like a friendly relationship. But as a Christian and just as a human in general, I believe that it is love that's going to pull us together. And even if you don't agree with somebody's ways, you should still love them unconditionally. And I think this is true for a leader as well. If you're a leader and you don't have compassion and you don't love for the people that you're leading around, then at the end of the day, just like he says at the end of verse 1, he's but a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. So if you don't have any of this stuff, you don't show love to the people that you're around, to the people that you're leading, then at the end of the day, you're nothing more than just spewing noise and nonsense that nobody is going to want to listen to, which is pretty much exactly what Paul is trying to get off here. And he says, "If I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries, but have not love, I am nothing." It doesn't matter if you're the wisest man to ever walk the earth. Of course, that would be awesome. I'm not saying it wouldn't. It doesn't matter this or that, or if you're the smartest thing that's ever lived on this world, it doesn't matter if you don't have love. At the center of everything is love. And I'm not talking love like go and kiss the person next to you. I'm talking love like having a general understanding and compassion towards someone. That's what love means in this sense. And he basically goes on to say that if I do all of these good deeds, if I give away everything and deliver my body to be burned, but don't have love, I gain nothing. And it's the same for leadership, I feel. Because you can sacrifice all this stuff. All of it. But if you're doing it for your own good, then nothing's going to come from it. If you don't have that love and that compassion for others with you, then nothing's going to come from it. And I think that's what Paul is trying to get at here. Especially whenever you look at it in the terms we're looking at it with leadership, if you don't love that group that you're leading, you're nothing to them. If you don't have a mutual love and respect for each other, then they're not going to listen to you. You're like a gong or a cymbal. If you don't have that love and you're doing all these great things for yourself, then they're not going to want to be a part of you. But then we kind of get to the meat here. The part that everybody knows. Whether you're a Christian or a non-Christian, doesn't matter. Because we've all heard this at weddings, where the preacher gets up and quotes, "Love is patient. Love is kind. Love does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things." We hear that all the time whenever we go to weddings, and it's kind of become kind of dull to us. But whenever we think about it in the terms of how a leader should act, I think that this is almost a perfect leader. And I know nobody's going to be able to be perfect, and no one's going to have all of these things that love does, but whenever you're picking a leader for a group project, for a church project, as a boss, whenever you're hiring people to manage, maybe at a restaurant, you need to look for these things, because these are important. The first one is patience. And I think for a good leader, and it's something that I've kind of always struggled with, I've never been a really patient person. And I've been in plenty of opportunities where I could be a leader. But at the end of the day, I couldn't because I wasn't patient enough. And I think that that's a testament to all of us. Because there are times in our life when we're just not patient. Whenever we're saying, no, this has to be done by this date, whenever in reality, the actual due date is months away. And I think to be a good leader, you have to have patience. You have to know when to wait, when not to wait. And I agree that there's a difference between good patience and bad patience. But at the end of the day, we have to be patient with our people. If they start making us mad, we can't turn our back on them. We have to stay with them and keep leading them in the right direction. And if they make you mad, what's going to keep you from turning around and saying, no, you're off. Get out of here. If you don't have patience. But then he goes on to write, love is kind. Love does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. And I feel like those kind of all fall under the same category of being kind. Being envious, being rude, kind of falls under this kind of antonym of kind. And of course, he's saying love is not those, so they pretty much mean the same thing here. And I think that this is a great way to kind of get this over. Because I think above all else, if you want to be a leader, you don't need to be ruthless. You don't need to be cutthroat. You don't need to be at these people 24/7. Instead, you need to be humble. And you need to say, look, I know, man. I know this is a hard challenge, but we're going to be able to get through this, man. Trust me, we're going to be able to. And you take into account what we said about patience, and you apply it to kindness, and you take away that envy, and you take away that boastfulness, and you take away that rage. And you're left with someone that is so compassionate and that will understand a ton of stuff. Love is kind. It's extremely kind if it's used in the right way. Of course, we kind of get down to the next part, and I think this kind of goes with the kindness. It says, it does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. And I think that kind of goes with the kindness thing as well, because you look, love is at its own place. If you're being kind, not out of love, but for your own selfish desires, then you're insisting on your own way. And that's exactly what Paul writes as us not to do. Our love is not to insist on our own ways. Our love is to insist on the ways of God. Our love is to insist on the ways of the people. We are called to love, especially in a leader position. You don't want to have your leader be telling you, look, you did this wrong, you did this wrong, you did this wrong, and we're kicking you out of the group. You want your leader to tell you, look, what you did maybe wasn't the most correct thing in the world. But we can work on it, and I'm going to show you what to do so that way next time we can get it right. A good leader takes initiative and is not irritable or resentful or insist on their own way. This said, love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, and endures all things. That means that our basis in life, our basis in leadership, should be based on love. If love bears all things, then why would we not base our leadership on love? And then we kind of get to the last thing here. It says, love never ends. As for prophecies, they will pass away. As for tongues, they will cease. And as for knowledge, it will pass away. And I think that's kind of testament to whenever we look at a good leader, we look at somebody like Martin Luther King, we look at somebody like Jesus and see the love that they gave people, and we remember them because of that. Whenever we think of a good leader, we don't think of someone who's ruthless. Whenever we think of a good leader, we don't think of a dictator who is over his people 24/7. We see somebody who loved above all else. Because all the other things, they pass away, but love stays. Love never ends. And one of my favorite things is right here in verse 11, where it says, when I was a child, I spoke like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I gave up these childish ways. And although we're kind of out of the love a little bit, whenever we grow up, we're supposed to abandon those childish ways. Those childish ways being begging for your attention, begging for all these different things. We're supposed to abandon those, like Paul says here. And I think that's something that we all struggle with, is we always go back to that jealousy, to that begging, to that pleading. When instead, like it says here, whenever you become a man, you give up. When you become a woman, you give up those childish ways. You throw them to the side. And then finally, as we wrap up here, the last verse says, so now faith, hope, and love abide. These three, but the greatest is love. Faith, hope, and love abide, but the greatest is love. If you're a leader in today's society, it doesn't matter if you have faith that you guys are going to get it done, and if they don't get it done, then I'm going to get it done, and I have faith that this project will reach an end by the end of the week and by the deadline. That's not what defines you as a good leader. If you have hope in your people that they'll get it done, that you'll get it done, then that's not the right thing. But if you love, which is the greatest of faith and hope and love, if you love, then you'll see your people that follow you in a whole nother light. And they'll see one who is patient, who is kind, who does not envy, who is not arrogant, who is not rude, who does not insist on their own way, is not irritable or resentful, doesn't rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth, and someone that bears all things, hopes all things, and endures all things as their leader. And not somebody who they look up and go, that person's selfish. They want all of this for their own glory. But they see somebody and they think, wow, he has the probability to change everything we have ever seen. All right, so welcome back. We just got done with the Bible study portion, and now I'm here with an extremely special guest. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hey, my name is Tyler Hoffpauir. I serve as the Baptist Collegiate Ministry campus minister here at Arkansas State.
Oh, man, that's awesome. So we just kind of got done in the Bible study portion talking about 1 Corinthians 13, about the whole love is patient, love is kind, love does not boast, and how that applies to leadership in our everyday lives, not just in the church, but also in business and stuff like that. And I've got some questions to you today about what defines a good leader and some examples of some good leaders. So in your opinion, what are some good characteristics of a leader? What do you think a leader needs to have?
Yeah, well, I think 1 Corinthians 13 is a good starting place. Love, joy, peace, patience, gentleness, kindness, self-control, all those things I think can be attributes of a great leader. I think one of the greatest examples, and I don't want to jump ahead of us, but one of the greatest examples of leadership that I can see is in the Bible is Jesus. And so some of the things that make him a great leader are things like his humility, things like his gentleness, things that like his love for other people, right? I think whenever we talk about leadership, the simplest definition of leadership for me is a person that has followers, right? How do you lead followers? I think the best way to lead them is through influence. And so the way that we influence people in their lives, a lot of that has to do with our character and how we act and our love and our humility and our patience with people. So, yeah.
So one that they don't really mention here in 1 Corinthians 13 is where it talks about being a servant to your people. I know I'm kind of getting ahead here talking about Jesus, but you said a characteristic of Jesus like gentle and caring and stuff like that, but do you think it also comes down to being a servant to the people that you're also leading around, to your followers?
Yeah, absolutely. I think servanthood is one of the cornerstones of Jesus' leadership model. You think about Jesus and you think about the King of the universe, the God himself, and he does things like he says, the first, they're going to be last, right? Mm-hmm. If you want to be first, you got to be last in my kingdom. He gives the most importance to the people that do the lowly tasks, right? He himself, one of the best examples of leadership, I think, is whenever he washes his disciples' feet. Right, they're dirty, nasty, sandy, gross feet, and he gets down and he says, "Hey, I'm gonna serve you. I'm gonna wash you." And you think about his position. Well, his position would say, "Man, somebody else could do that. These people can take care of themselves, right?" But he, as the King of the universe, says, "No, this is important enough for me that I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to serve these people." And what that does is you see the inverse reaction of people just care so much more for him. People want to follow him more. People respect him more.
And I think it also comes down to, you look at some of the leaders that we have today, some of the extremely high in power people that we have, and they're not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. And the fact that Jesus is able to do this, and he's perfect in every single way, and he lowers himself down to that kind of position to where he's doing a servant's job, washing the feet. I think that is something that is so spectacular whenever you look at how a leader should be, especially in today's society, somebody that's willing to go down and work with the people that are under him, that are following him. And I think that's a spectacular point. But now getting ahead, in your opinion, who are the three greatest leaders in the Bible?
Three greatest leaders. I'm going to exclude Jesus from the list because I think that's like an automatic, assuming that he's the greatest leader. Okay, so I'm going to go with David in the Old Testament. I think David has, not because he was the most moral person. I think we see a lot of his failures and his struggles, but I think the key thing about David is, though he had responsibility, though he had skills, what we read a lot in the Old Testament is about his relationship with the Lord and how he always prioritized that. So there are times where we just kind of hear his cries in the Psalms and we go, okay, this guy was always on track with the Lord. He always wanted the Lord to be in what he was doing. And yes, he messes up, but at the end of the day, he is sorry, and not sorry just to man, but sorry to God. And so I think David is certainly one person. I think kind of an off-the-wall one that I don't think a lot of people would say is Esther. I think we don't give enough credit to our ladies in the Bible. But in her situation, what happens is she kind of does not allow the authority of man to stop her from doing what she knows is right. And I think that that's difficult, right? So she says, man, this king, he's got some things against the Jewish people. I have to use my influence, right? We talked about leadership being influence a second ago. I have to use my influence to say, okay, I'm going to do something for these people. So she goes to the king. She says, hey, can we change some things? Can we save these people? Can this be different? And so I think that that's a great example of using your influence. And then thirdly, all these are Old Testament examples, but there's a lot of narrative in the Old Testament. And so I think we kind of get into a lot of the heart of some people. But Daniel would probably be the third person that I would say. And just his idea that, man, no matter my circumstance, no matter where I'm at, no matter the culture, no matter what everybody else says, I'm going to do what I know what is right. I'm going to bow down. I'm going to worship the Lord. I'm going to keep that my priority. I'm going to do those things even when it's difficult. And I think that kind of leading by example, Daniel would be the person that I would go to.
Yeah, I was totally not expecting you to say Esther. That's awesome, though. Now that I kind of hear where you're coming from, whenever I thought about like some of the greatest leaders in the Bible, Esther didn't pop into my head. But I agree with you. I think that she is one of the most influential and one of the coolest to kind of look at, especially in the Old Testament. So we kind of bounced around this a little bit, and I kind of want to go a little more in depth with this. But what are some important characteristics of Jesus Christ?
Yeah, some important characteristics of Jesus. So. This might sound repetitive, but his humility, his service, the way that he would teach with authority, I think was always a conversation that was happening in the New Testament. He would say things and people would say, well, whose authority are you staying that under? Well, he was always submissive to God the Father. And so he was always in tune with what God wanted him to do. And he led and cared and loved for his people. We see, like, especially like with Lazarus, one of the most famous passages in the Bible is Jesus wept, right? Because it's so short, two sentences, or two words, and that makes up the sentence. But what that shows is like his relationship with his people, right? And if influence is leadership, and really influence is also relationship, then what we can kind of see is like Jesus was genuine. He loved people. He didn't just want something from them, but he wanted something for them. So. Lots of different things. I think we could go there, but that's where I would go.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, I know that might have been a little repetitive, but I just kind of want to dig a little deeper in there. And I think you bringing up Jesus wept is also important when you look at him as God, as him coming down, him feeling emotions just as us humans did, and how he can be just that wonderful leader and that wonderful person and be completely perfect. And I think that shows even more testament to why we should look to him whenever we look for characteristics of a good leader, of a good person to put in charge. So do you think our culture today has the wrong idea of what a good leader should look like?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that one of the words that we use is like, how do we define a strong leader? Well, I think part of that lies in the question, like, what is a strong leader? Like, we tie this idea of leadership with strength. Like, the way that you have to lead is loud and proud. A lot of times the people that we associate ourselves with or we want to follow are the most eloquent people, the people that can say it first, the people that can say it loudest, right? But the key difference between just maybe secular leadership or everyday leadership and Christian leadership, I think, is that idea of servanthood, right? This idea that I don't have to be first, right? The person that is first in Jesus' kingdom is the person that was last, right? It's the person that wants to serve, that wants to say, okay, I'm going to do this not so that I can get glory, not so that I can get the position, not so that I can get more power, but I'm going to do this because I care about people. And so whenever we begin to instill those values, then we really begin to say, okay, well, what the world is teaching me is like, whatever I can do to get to the top of the pyramid, to get to the top of the flow charts, to get to more power, like whatever I can do to grab more power, that's what I'm going to do. And that's what we call leadership, is whenever we have the position. But what Jesus is saying is, no, the person that is actually a true leader is a true servant.
Yeah, and I agree. I think like as Christians, the way that we have to kind of show what a good leader is by showing exactly how Jesus was, being gentle, being loving, being kind, being patient with each other, being that kind of servant leader. And I think that's one of the biggest struggles that we see today in our nation or in the world necessarily whenever it comes to being a leader, is we try to look for the person who's the loudest, who's the strongest, when in reality we should be looking for the person that cares the most about the people who's trying to lead around.
Absolutely.
And so my final question And just to give a little bit of a preface, because we've never done a final question before here, as this is the first episode, but my final question is going to be the same for every single interview. And I think this one kind of applies to leadership whenever it comes to church leadership, which we haven't touched on all that much. But where do you see the church personally in the next 15 to 20 years?
Yeah, well, I think that's a big question. And it has a lot of varied possible answers, and I think a lot of it has to do with where you live and where you're from and what church looks like in your area. And what I mean by that is church looks drastically different in the South than it does in the North. It looks drastically different in North America than it does in Europe. And so if we're talking about the church, like big C, like everybody, and that's where I'm going to go with this, is I think we've got some things that we're going to be dealing with and struggling with. So this idea that people are individualistic, and let me kind of just clarify what I mean. It used to be back in the day, right, that we assumed that there was some absolute truth out there, and what we had inside were our emotions and our opinions and things. And what society kind of did was they said, okay, I'm going to align myself with the objective truth, the objective norm, right? What we see now is people are saying, I can believe what I want. I am the objective truth. I can do what I want, even though it's subjective. But, like my truth is my truth, right? And what is out there are people with emotions who are trying to convince me to do one thing or the other. And so we've seen like this flip, right? And so it's become like a very individualistic thing. Like our faith becomes very private. It becomes very personal, right? Whenever we see the Old Testament church, the New Testament church, there's not a lot of like super personal things, right? It's like, oh, this group did this, right? Or these people held all things in common together, as we see in Acts 2. But everything's become so individualistic. And what that does is that puts us in a culture which looks a lot more like Europe. And so I think that is what we call post-Christian, is kind of a theoretical term, or a more specific term to what we're talking about. But it's like this idea that like Christianity used to be the norm, right? You used to feel pressured to go to church because that was what everybody did. And what we see is that's not the case anymore. Already we're seeing that. And in 15 to 20 years, I think it's going to be even more. So there's what we call a nominal Christian, which means like an average Christian who like maybe they're not super diligent in their faith, but they do have some beliefs. Maybe they come on Sundays, but they don't do much else. That's what we kind of call a nominal Christian. It's going to kind of eliminate some of that. Everybody's going to be kind of hot, or they're going to be cold. And probably the majority of people are going to be cold. Like they're not going to want to be a part of the church. They're gonna continue to think like the church is a cold place, a place that I don't want to be a part of, a place that's judgmental, et cetera, et cetera. And on the flip side of that, the church is going to have to learn how to respond to that. We used to have a framework where a lot of people believed in objective truth. A lot of people believed that there was a God. We're seeing less and less and less of that. So the Christian faith, at least in my denomination and in my experience, has been about like spreading. And the way that we spread is sometimes we appeal to some things that we already believe. So like, for instance, in the Old Testament, or in the New Testament, Paul would go around and he would say, well, you're Jewish, you already believe this. Let me just kind of tweak it a little bit and let me show you the truth. Something that we do nowadays is we say, okay, well, everybody kind of believes in a God. Everybody kind of believes that there's an objective truth. Everybody kind of believes that there's like sin, right? And we kind of go off of those pre-assumed notions. What's beginning to happen is those pre-existing notions don't happen anymore. There's more and more people that are identifying as atheists, as agnostic, as I have no God, and there's no framework there. They don't believe that they sin. They don't believe that there's any enmity between them and God. There's nothing there. And so that's going to make things a lot harder if we want to grow our faith and help more people know God better. And so I think that's just going to become increasingly difficult. I have to give credit. I read and listen to a lot of Tim Keller's stuff, and he has a great video presentation that he gave at Dallas Theological Seminary. He's a Presbyterian pastor, but he gave it at Dallas Theological Seminary, where he kind of addresses like the future of the church, where we currently are, the cliffs that we're about to jump off of, those kind of things. I get a lot of my thinking from him, so I got to give credit there.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that we see a lot mentioned in the Bible is not to be a lukewarm Christian. I think you just hit on that absolutely. And just that it's going to become even more defined who's going to be either that hot or that cold, like you said, and I agree with that 100%. So I just want to thank you so much for coming and letting me interview today. It's been an absolute pleasure. So just go ahead, just advertise all you want about things you got coming up in your ministry and what have you.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. Something that we do every year is we do a homecoming variety show. It's not spiritual in any sense. It's just a great time together where we do some people have some talents, some acts, and that's going to be on the Thursday of homecoming week at 6:15, and we do a free cookout beforehand. And then we also have a Halloween festival kind of dance, if you will, that's going to happen on Halloween night at 6:15 also. So those are just two fun ways to get connected with what we do. We do a lot of things throughout the week, Bible studies and a lunch program and all kinds of things. And so if anybody's interested in any of those things, check out our website at astatebcm.com.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And thank all of you for tuning in to the very first episode of Dig Deeper. I'm Jordan Moore, and have a great afternoon.